Okay, so thank you, Julie. My name is Patty York, and I'm pretty excited about talking about Phragmites because, as Steve mentioned in his talk, a lot of us, we get out of our graduate school studies and we don't do a lot of science anymore, especially working in the government. But this is kind of a unique opportunity that we're having this year to possibly be a little bit more ingrained in science, which is going to be great, hopefully. So I'm going to talk about Phragmites and kind of where we started, where we are now, and then where we hope to go. Okay, so just for a review, in case anybody doesn't really know a lot about Phragmites, Phragmites australis is a species, but there are 3 subspecies that exist in the U.S. And to complicate things even more, there's actually been, I think, 57 is the latest number of haplotypes that have been genetically modified or identified. So it's pretty complicated, and it's hard to tell the difference between just the 3 basic ones to start, especially once you kind of get into those characteristics of what their or genotypes and haplotypes. So, which one is the red? So the first one listed up here is the native species that predominantly exists around the United States. And this is just kind of a habitat suitability map. It doesn't necessarily mean it's in every single spot that the green covers. But the green up here correlates with the green on the map. The blue is this kind of Gulf Coast Phragmites. It's also native to the U.S. I mean, those two, they don't really have very overlapping range, as you can see. The third one, and the one that's kind of of greatest concern to everybody in the noxious weed world, is this haplotype M, or Phragmites australis, subspecies australis. And this was introduced to the East Coast in the early 1800s, and it's gradually expanding westward. And again, this is just a habitat suitability map, so it doesn't really exist in all of those places, but it has the potential to be able to do that. And that's one thing we're kind of worried about with this subspecies. So this is the current distribution according to EDDMAPS, which is an online database of presence points for noxious weeds specifically. This gives you a little bit better idea of kind of where Phragmites is really bad. There's definitely a lot of points missing on this East Coast. I specifically worked with this species over in the on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, so I know it's all over that area. So this only is as representative as the points that have been put into the database. And you can see, though, that we do have some in Kansas and Nebraska and Utah, and we do actually know of a few points in Colorado at this point, so I will talk about those later, and we'll hope to get those uploaded to EDDMAPS soon. So a little bit about the biology of Phragmites. This is a primarily wetland species, but it can grow in areas where there's not, inundated water. It's pretty tall. It's a perennial grass that spreads by rhizomes. It does also spread by seeds, and that's probably what's contributing to those haplotype varieties that are out there now. It forms these super dense thickets in or near water. You can see that right here as an example. Has a pretty long blooming season. The flowers are kind of droopy. They can range in color. So there's a lot of variety in this plant, these plants that makes it specifically difficult to identify, even just whether you have the native or the invasive in your backyard. So impacts of Phragmites are pretty well documented. They can negatively affect biodiversity. They create these big monocultures where all the native biodiversity is pushed out, which obviously then leads up the food chain and causes impacts for everything. Ecological function can be impacted. Recreational use of wetlands and shorelines. It's hard to kind of get in to the water if you're a boater, fisher, hunter, trying to access those areas. It's a lot thicker than the native vegetation. It can contribute to difficulty in multiple ways. In the Chesapeake Bay, it's actually decreasing property values because you can no longer see the shoreline, so you don't have this pristine wetland habitat anymore. It's actually kind of bringing property values down. And then it can also increase fire risk, which is a specifically dangerous thing in dry arid environments like we have in Colorado, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like in one of the future slides. Okay, so this is kind of gearing ourselves now to the history of Phragmites in Colorado specifically. In 2010, a very large site was identified along Fountain Creek, which is right outside, well, inside Pueblo, the city limits. It runs from 13th Street down here, or up here to the confluence of the Arkansas River, and it was very, very thick. And Steve, did that come in as did they remove tamarisk and then the Phragmites came in? Is that? Which makes sense because one of the things tamarisk does is it may put more salt into the ground. And Phragmites, as I said, I dealt with them in the estuaries on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, so it definitely can live in brackish waters or saline environments. So if there was any kind of input left after that tamarisk removal, Phragmites had no problem getting in there. So you can see it just is this humongously dense monoculture that they decided to do a controlled burn with because of the heightened fire danger. There's so much litter accumulating in those areas, especially in the winter, that they went ahead and did some burn through there. And the PDR specialist that was in my place before me went down and actually observed this happening. So then in 2012, a little bit after this, we put Phragmites australis on the Colorado noxious weed watch list. So this is the one list on the noxious weed list that is technically not regulated. It's basically a place to save species for us to learn more about the distribution and the impacts around the state. Helps as kind of a medium location for us to, before we decide whether or not to list those. Because as Steve also mentioned, we don't want to just add every species onto the list and give our county weed managers more to do. So, and at this point, this area looks a lot better. It's not only Phragmites anymore. I forgot to put a picture up of it, but it does seem like there is still some invasive Phragmites, and there also seems to be some native Phragmites in the area. So it's another one of those things where we have to go figure out what we have. Okay, so after we listed it on our watch list, we actually were approached by the Chicago Botanic Gardens, or an email was forwarded to us. I'm not sure exactly how it got to us, but they were offering free genetic testing for Phragmites, and they had kind of this complicated sampling design, which we were really at the tail end of the study, so we only had about 3 or 4 counties able to participate. It was also pretty complicated. You had to take 12 or so points, you had to take soil samples from in the Phragmites patch and outside of the Phragmites patch. You had to characterize the vegetation that was outside Phragmites. So it was quite a number of pieces in terms of the sampling protocol, which isn't a big deal, but we kind of hit it at the very end, and so I think it was a little bit too much for most of our counties to participate. But we did have 3 or 4 participate. We got that testing for Mesa County that there was confirmation that those were invasive populations. We got confirmation for Rio Blanco County populations that they were actually native, which was a surprise to them because he thought they were invasive, so we'll talk more about that. And then a few other counties, Garfield County, for example, submitted samples, but because it was so late in the season, they weren't able to read the genetic material, so those came back inclusive. Okay, so then after that Chicago Botanic Garden study, I put out just a very basic presence-absence survey of all of our counties. Basically, do you have Phragmites in your county? Yes or no? If you do, how many acres would you guess you have? So we got 45 counties responding, and this was a very kind of mixed bag of responses. We had 5 yes, definitely had the invasive responses. And I forgot to color in Denver, but that was one of them that said yes. So that was Logan County, Denver County, El Paso, Pueblo, and Mesa. Then we have 6 maybe responses, as in I have Phragmites, I'm not sure which one it is. That was the other kind of vertical or diagonal line counties. And then we had the Rio Blanco County say they have native Phragmites. And this was very generic, and the other the four species in this survey that came up as our top present species were baby sprouts, yellow flygars, Swansea, and then Phragmites was in there as well. So the next thing we did was a couple years later, we sent out a more in-depth survey that asked specific questions tailored to each of these four species that we had as highly present in our state. It was a Google form survey document. We had 93 responses, 60 of which responded to the Phragmites questions. Basically, at the beginning of each section, it asks you, do you know about this species? Would you like to answer questions about it? If you said yes, then it took you through all the rest of the questions for that species. So we had a whole variety of people respond to this, which was really great. The Tamara's Coalition is in there, and as one of the nonprofits, CSU extension agents, county, city, federal, state, all kinds of private landowners as well. So we really had a good mix from this study. So to just go through a couple of the questions that we asked in this more extensive survey, the first was, do you know if the stands of Phragmites in your county are native or non-native? So out of the 60 responses, you can see that only 8% said they are definitely native, 18% said they are definitely non-native, 15% said we don't have any stands that I know of, so they may just have been answering questions because they know about Phragmites, but they don't maybe manage any land that deals with Phragmites on it. But then you can see the vast majority of the people, again, said I don't know if these stands are native or non-native. So that immediately kind of triggers to us that more work is needed in that area. So then we asked if you've ever submitted a sample of your Phragmites for identification. And the first one is a yes to the Cornell University. They do kind of a phenotype, just a visual identification process. And he's pretty good, or she, I think it's a he. But that's one way you can get a sample done, but it's not a genetic analysis. 3 said yes, we submitted to the Chicago Botanic Garden study. 10 said that they haven't submitted samples, but they will now that they know that that's an option. But 40-something people said just flat out, no, I have not submitted samples. So this kind of gets, into the thought of, well, if we give people an opportunity to submit genetic samples, and will they do it? Will they do it if they have to pay, or will they do it if it's free, or will they do it at all? And those are kind of some of the questions that we'll be asking in the next year next few months to hopefully be able to figure out and get everybody in the no or the yes column. Then we asked about behavior, and we said, so have you seen populations of non-native, or how have you seen populations of non-native Phragmites behave? And the lowest one said, we do not seem to have Phragmites, or it's not thriving in my area. 21% says that non-native Phragmites do not seem to be increasing, so that was interesting. And then we have about 35% each saying non-native Phragmites themselves are getting larger, but I don't see them spreading. And the other one is that non-native Phragmites is spreading aggressively. So you can see there's still kind of a mix on people's responses in terms of how this species is behaving in our state. Okay, and then this was kind of just all over the place. This question, where do you think Phragmites belong on Colorada's noxious weed list? So, as Fred kind of mentioned, list A is the list where if you find it, you have to eradicate it. List B is more of a county-by-county decision on whether you want to try to eradicate that species or whether it's too far gone and you just want to suppress it. List C is, we focus on biocontrol agents and things like that because whether or not it's worth putting time and effort on the ground to get rid of those species is kind of questionable at this state. Those species tend to be pretty widespread. There were a lot of people that said they didn't have any opinion, and then a lot said to stay on the watch list. So here again, you can kind of see people are really all over the place in terms of how to manage this species or how they think the state should manage the species. So, oh, and then in addition to that, we asked, why or what kind of information can you provide to us that will help us make a determination on listing this species. And there were a lot of concerns for riparian habitat. There were, a lot of people had seen this species in other areas and seen the destruction. They wanted there was a lot of support for more educational materials and outreach. So what really came down as the conclusion is that it's clear that some kind of genetic testing or some kind of statewide supported testing is really needed. So that's what we hope to do this year. Mesa County has actually contacted Utah State University and gotten some preliminary estimates on cost. They're pretty expensive, but you can, test a lot at once and get your costs down. We've also talked to CSU scientists. They're interested. They have the ability to do the genetic testing in their labs. And we could run up to about 200 samples or even more if we went through CSU, so that would be great. There's also the potential that we could publish this data, so that gets back to that whole science background and kind of is exciting. So we still need to finalize the cost, figure out what we're going to do in terms of that. And then I will send out an email basically talking about how we're going to do the sampling and try to get some initial estimates on how many patches we're actually talking about sampling in the state. Because we're not just wanting to sample the non-native Phragmites, we also want to know where all the native Phragmites is, so that if we do list Phragmites, it's not going to cause native populations to be killed because we don't know what it is. And then hopefully we'll come up with some kind of comprehensive genetic map of native versus non-native Phragmites in the state. So here you can see a picture of Teresa Neese with Mesa County. She's holding what is suspected to be a non-native Phragmites plant next to her. You can see it's definitely about twice as tall, at least, as she is. So I've got some details on what we're thinking about field grouping and the plan. I won't go through it all of it because I'm running out of time, but you can see we're kind of developing this as we go. But one of the things we want to do is the Western Slope Phragmites Study Group includes the Tamarack Coalition, Mesa County, Marion County, a couple of other organizations out there, and they've already kind of identified how to at least categorize their populations as either most likely native, most likely invasive, or unclear. So what we would do is we would initially have everybody go out and categorize their populations that way, and then we would probably take 3 plants per sample from a subset of those groups, so we can kind of extrapolate those, whatever those samples come back at, as to the rest of that group. There's a lot of documentation on, how to tell the difference in the field, and so we'll kind of pass some of that out. The group has figured out that possibly so the first one is suspected non-native, the second one is suspected native, and then that pattern continues. And you can see this kind of auxiliary bud on the natives. It seems to have a tuft of hair that's grown with it, so that seems to be maybe an additional identifying characteristic that we can use in the field. But as you can see, just these are suspected natives and suspected exotics right next to each other, and it can be very difficult to tell the difference just by visual inspection. So they've come up with this catalog form. This part of it gives all your site info. It has a place for you to circle whether you think it's native, introduced, or hybrid on the bottom. And then this is kind of that same list of characteristics that you would find in the native versus the non-native. And you would circle which ones that you had and you expand. And not everything's going to be apparent at once, but this gives us kind of at least that basic initial identification tool to use in the field. Okay, so then, after we get our subset, our samples taken from each population, we'll have everybody send it to CDA, and we'll work with either CSU or the Utah State University to come up with this genetic analysis that will hopefully determine a map of Phragmites around the entire state of Colorado, and from there, we'll be able to figure out whether or not we should actually list it formally or not. So if you are interested in participating in the study, please do email me or give me a call. I can talk more about it. But that's all I have for now.
This is more just a comment. I did the Phragmites. I sent in samples to the Chicago. I spent like 2 days going to all the different sites, and I never heard back, never heard back, never heard back. So finally, they're like, sorry, we weren't able to do anything with your samples. And they didn't tell me why, so I was really frustrated. So I'm just glad to hear that you're, doing this, taking this for the state.
Yes, thank you for that comment. The lady who was in charge of that study went on maternity leave almost immediately after she sent the email to us. So we had, if you got your samples in like immediately, then some of them got processed, and then the others, it seemed to me, dried out by the time you were actually able to do any kind of analysis on them. So yeah, I'm sorry that happened to some of us. It was kind of a Midwestern-centered study, so I think the Colorado samples probably got pushed to the very back of the list anyway. So yes, that's why we kind of wanted to follow up on that as well. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm just curious who at Utah State University are you working with, or have you been talking to?
I'm not sure who the person is specifically. Julie, do you know? Karen Kettering?
Okay, good.
Okay, is that a good person?
Yeah, she's their expert on it, but I know some of their other students involved, and it was just nice to see that you had reached out to them. I just thought we have some expertise there.
Yeah, specifically Mesa County, the county weed manager there is just really gung-ho and forward moving, and they've got a good amount of Phragmites. It's one of the areas of the state where we are really concerned about the invasive introductions. So they have kind of taken it on themselves to lead the way a little bit, and we're almost piggybacking on them a little bit, but we're going to work together as well. So thank you. Anything else? Okay.
Okay, so it's time for afternoon break, and I am just going to ask to remind you to turn in your nomination for the First President's Award if you haven't done that. And a reminder that our poster and exhibitor session is tonight at 5, the social hour, so it's free appetizers and a free drink, a free drink ticket in your name tag, so you can get that. Okay, we'll see you after.